Hola, mi gente. ¿Cómo están? Welcome again to another episode. Welcome to the Limbo Latino podcast. This is our podcast for the people. I'm your host, Joseph Colon, a.k.a. the Limbo Latino. I'm looking forward to today's episode. Many listeners have actually responded to me and asked me to feature some up-and-coming trailblazers. And I think today we have an exceptional leader. But before we start this show, you know the deal. Your homework is to make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. No excuses. Rate it, like it, share it, rate it a 5, and comment wherever you can to get your podcast. Make sure that you are engaged as much as possible. This helps immensely in our reach to get this information out to the masses. Again, we need all your support. Tell your friends, family. Also, make your way to the YouTube channel, the Limbo Latino, and you can see the full interview in all its glory. This podcast is dedicated to you and to uplift our people in a different way, to reframe our history, to also pay homage to our ancestors, their contributions, but also, like I said, our future movers and shakers and how they influence. So today in our episode, I've asked one of my dear student leaders from way back in the day, who is now big time, and her name is Jasmin Chavez, and she is a dynamic leader with a track record in civic engagement, legislative advocacy, and organizing. She holds degrees in political science and Spanish from McDaniel College. And at McDaniel, Jasmin founded McDaniel LULAC, which is the League of United Latin American Citizens. And she served as president for the Council for 3 years. Jasmin attributes her success to the experiences and commitment to the community within AARP's legal counsel for the elderly and as the state director for Virginia LULAC. Jasmin is an alumna of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, the UCLA Labor Center's Dream Summer Program, and HACU. Jasmin's commitment to uplifting her community has earned her recognition as a recipient of the LULAC National Woman of the Year Award in 2018 and as a recipient of the Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship. Jasmin loves giving back to her community by serving on several boards, including McDaniel's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Board, the Smithsonian Latino Center's Young Ambassadors Alumni Network, and Victoria for Congress. Jasmin is a fierce leader who is passionate about social justice, and I am sure that after you hear her today, you'll see why she is such an important trailblazer. Welcome, Jasmin. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I'm super excited to be here.
So, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Awesome. So, with all of my guests, I've been able to ask this one simple question. I want you to spend some time to let our people know your story, who you are.
Definitely. So I immigrated to this country at the age of 1 with my parents from El Salvador. We ended up in Falls Church, Virginia. We came to this country with absolutely nothing. We had no idea we were going to come. We mainly fled because of the violence of the Salvadoran Civil War and the effects of it. So that's why we immigrated. And so we came to Falls Church, Virginia. I grew up there. That's where I spent middle school, elementary school, and high school. And growing up in that community, it was a very predominantly immigrant community, very low income. I wasn't even 10 when my mom started asking me to translate documents for my community members. And so doing that kind of work, translating documents and talking to folks, it made me realize, that there were a lot of injustices in the immigrant community. And me being an immigrant myself, it was something that hit home for me. It was around middle school that I decided to do something about it. I decided to organize food and clothing drives because, I looked at a lot of my community members and I thought of my family and myself when I saw them, because a lot of folks, didn't have enough money for food or didn't have enough money for clothing. And, I, as someone who has been in that situation, I felt like I had to do something about it. And so fast forward to high school, decided to do some lobbying work, got involved with VACOLAO, which is the Virginia Coalition for Latino Organizations. I believe it was sophomore year of high school where I was able to lobby for in-state tuition. I know at the time it was under attack. I was, I think, one of 8 youth students who were able to advocate for this very important piece of legislation. And it was truly eye-opening because, we got back from Richmond and the media was waiting there for us. It was an experience that, made me realize that our voices do matter. And I was so young at the time that, I didn't really feel like my voice mattered. But that day, I really felt like my voice mattered because I was able to share my experiences. And while I may have not been able to change the minds of some of my legislators, I was able to, maybe change the way they felt about it, in their heart, because it's an issue that affects a lot of us very directly, immigration. And so I was able to talk about firsthand experience with my members of Congress and the delegates of Virginia. And so after that experience, I got involved with LULAC, which stands for the League of United Latin American Citizens. I mainly got involved with them because I met Cindy Benavides during one of my lobbying trips to Richmond, and she told me to get connected to LULAC, so I got involved. I also got connected to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute in high school because I participated in the R2All Next Gen program, and that program completely changed my life. I had never seen myself as a leader until then, and just thinking about, just reminiscing and thinking about CHCI in general, I basically grew up with them. I spent high school, all of college, and even now as an adult under their mentorship and their support. And I'm just immensely grateful that, they've been a part of those stages in my life, because I really took advantage of all the professional development they've offered, all of the networking experiences. And I have a familia, which, I didn't really have a Latino community that I could call a familia here in Virginia. And I have that with CHCI. Whatever I need, they are there to provide me with advice, support, and I'm just incredibly thankful for them. I went off to McDaniel. Just the college process itself was very difficult for me because my family, like I mentioned, we immigrated to this country. We had no idea what anything was. And so my parents weren't able to help me with the college application process. I had to seek CHCI's advice, LULAC's advice. I had some good high school teachers at Jeb Stuart, which is now called Justice, to support me and assist me with, writing the essays. And that's how I was able to go off to college. I thankfully went with almost a full ride. I honestly don't think I would have been able to go had it not been for that much money, because my parents can't afford school. Growing up, they could barely afford food. So it was just like, I'm either going to college if I get a full ride, or I'm not going to go, because there was literally no other option. And so I'm incredibly thankful for, getting that big scholarship from McDaniel, but also for all of the mentorship and support they gave me throughout college. It was a bit of a shock to get to McDaniel because it's a predominantly white institution. I saw 10 Latinos on campus my freshman year. Every year, maybe I saw one more Latino being added to the different classes, but it was a whole different community. It was a community that didn't have a lot of Latinos. And so when I spent some time in the community, in the Westminster, Maryland community, I realized that there was a lot of discrimination towards Latinos. I, at one point, sang in the choir at the church by McDaniel, and there were folks who were very, they were very outspoken when it came to voicing their opinions about the Latino immigrant community in Westminster. So it was then that I was like, what, I think we need to start a LULAC council here, because, we're not talking about Latino issues, because at McDaniel they had a Latino club, but it only focused on culture. We didn't have anything advocacy related. We actually didn't have any orgs on campus that did any advocacy work. And so immediately I thought my freshman year, like, we need to start a LULAC council. It wasn't just me that felt, this discrimination. A lot of folks, a lot of Latino students would come to me saying, oh, I went to Walmart and someone said this to me, a racial slur, or someone, said this to me. And it's still happening. It's a community that's, it's a very racist community, if we're being really honest. And so creating that LULAC council was just amazing. And the amount of work we were able to do still blows my mind to this day, because, when I was in college, we had a presidential election in 2016. And so we did a lot of mobilizing of the community, getting the Latino vote out, making sure folks got to the polls, making sure folks, were at least registered to vote. We had a lot lot of different events focusing on the immigrant community. We had DACA teach-ins, we had DreamAct summits, we had a lot of events focused on immigration, but we also had a lot of events on healthcare and education. And in addition to that, every year that I was president, we attended the Emerge Latino Conference, which is a conference that happens in DC every year that focuses on empowering young adults from across the country. That my work wasn't in vain, that, it's continuing. And, it's just, for me, that's what's fulfilling, like seeing that the work is being continued, seeing that folks are still doing this advocacy work. Like, that is why I created McDaniel LULAC, so that we could be advocates in the community, but also teach others about how to advocate in their communities as well. And so that's what empowers, that's what people need, empowerment. And so that's still there at McDaniel, and I'm super happy about that. Going after, talking more about, after college, I graduated with my degree in political science and Spanish. My first job right out of college at an immigration law firm, and it was a good experience. For me, the highlight of that job would be that I was able to go to the border. I fundraised a lot of money along with a group of folks to be able to go to the border and, stay there and help asylees, their asylum applications, helping them with that process. And so for me, like, that experience was just like eye-opening, because it just like made everything come full circle, right? Because, I came to this country at the age of 1, and, now out of college, my first job was going to the border and helping folks who were essentially, who look like me and who have a similar story to me. And so for me, like, that was just incredibly emotional, eye-opening, but it also helped me realize that I'm on the right track. I'm doing what I love, and that I'm working with the community that I wanted to work with, low-income immigrant community. And so to this day, now I work at Legal Counsel for the Elderly. The work that we do at Legal Counsel for the Elderly, it focuses on providing free legal services to low-income DC residents. In my role, I connect the organization with Latinx organizations, and I assist our attorneys with client cases. And so for me, up until now, all the work that I've done, it all connect. I've wanted my life to focus on assisting the low-income immigrant Latinx community, because it's something that I identify with. And for me, the work wouldn't be fulfilling if that wasn't what I was doing. So that's why I do the work that I do, and that's why I work with low-income Latinx immigrants.
Jasmin,
so that's my story.
That is an amazing story. And we're going to continue to the rest of your story, because you have so much more that you've done. It's amazing that in your stage in your life that you've actually accomplished so much. I wanted to talk about specifically, and I know we hadn't talked about this, but I think it connects with what you just said, the identities piece. What are some things that, especially for our listeners and folks who are chiming in, who may or may not know much about the immigrant community or DACA, or, you don't have to give us a full lesson, but what are some misconceptions about those communities in particular, and why it's important for us as people who are in social justice, or even folks who are just maybe on the outskirts trying to learn more? What is it? Why is it important for us to really engage this topic?
I think it's important to engage this topic because at one point or another, we've met someone, with an immigrant background, or someone who is an immigrant. And so I think it's important for us to be knowledgeable on, the different terminology and issues, because being a dreamer is different from being a DACA recipient, right? Because a DACA recipient, they are able to, they have identification. A dreamer, isn't able to apply for DACA. And DACA, only a couple of folks were able to apply for DACA because there was a certain age, you had to be a certain age after a certain time. And so I know, for example, my godbrother, he wasn't able to apply for DACA because, he had passed the age and the year that you had to apply for it. And so it's important to know that terminology, but also, understand that everyone who's an immigrant, not everyone who's an immigrant is undocumented, right? Like, I came to this country, I'm not undocumented, but, I connect a lot with folks who are undocumented because I understand what they've gone through, because just coming to a different country and having to figure out this whole new world. It's like trying to figure out a whole new world, trying to understand a new language, trying to understand, all these things that are created by, this new government, this new societal structure. It's a lot. And so I totally feel the experience. I didn't, travel across the border and, go through, really awful situations that some undocumented folks have gone through, like terrible things that have happened, or on the border violence, just terrible things. I didn't experience that, but I know, and I've seen movies, but I also have family members who have gone through that. So through their experiences, I'm able to understand, like it's incredibly difficult, like all that they've gone through, and I connect with it, and I may not directly identify with it, but I'm an immigrant as well. My parents, we immigrated, and just the whole idea of migration, everyone who has migrated to another country, they identify with each other because it's a whole new ballgame, it's a whole new world. And in college, we did a lot of research on migration. And a book that I highly recommend to folks is The Distance Between Us by Reina Grande, because in that book, whether you're an immigrant or not, you're able to understand what migration means, like in depth. And Reina Grande, through her story, is able to really, explain to us what migration looks like. And I cried so many times during that book because it's just so emotional, but it really gives you an understanding of what migration is, why people do it, whether it's for safety, for fleeing violence, for money. A lot of our Latin American countries, a lot of us come from very impoverished backgrounds in Latin America. So some of us don't have any other choice but to come here to try to find better opportunities for our families. I hope I answered your question, Joe,
No,
but
you did. And I think the reason why I framed it that way is because I think for a lot of people, they may or may not have the language around it or the information needed, not make a decision, but to really talk about, how do you support, or how do you engage, or how do you advocate for people who are in some of these situations. And it's not as easy as someone trying to come over the border. It's a lot more complicated than that. And that we need to be, looking at it from a lens of humanity and really encapsulating the experiences. And we've seen many of the things that have happened at the detention centers and things that have been occurring throughout, the past, 5, even 10 years of kind of this intense migration, and basically looking at it from a different perspective. I know that it's a little bit more entrenched and a little bit more difficult to talk about. Yeah, thank you so much for putting a highlight on that, because I think for me, myself, I'm Puerto Riqueño, so my citizenship is intact. But to think about looking at other people's plight and the way that they're really trying to achieve not just the American dream, but just to live, and giving opportunities that are their right as human beings to live and to be prosperous. So I think about your work. You talk about LULAC immensely, and that intense relationship that you have and that camaraderie. Talk to me about that and why that organization is such an important one. I'd like to highlight them, and how can people get involved in particular, and how they can engage and support that group.
Definitely. I say that LULAC is very important to me because, I basically, I grew up with them. I spent high school, college, and now actually now I spend a lot more time working with them as the state director, because I'm managing a whole state. When I met Cindy Benavides, who is now the CEO of LULAC, back in the day, she told me to look into LULAC because of professional development opportunities for youth. And at the time, I was in high school, I was a little shy. I was lobbying in Richmond, but I was constantly asked to, speak louder, because as the shy persona that I had, I wasn't, I didn't have the professional development that I needed. And so she's like, you should connect with LULAC. And so I got home from that event, Googled the organization, and the rest is history. So like I mentioned earlier, I started a council at McDaniel because we didn't have a Latinx advocacy group on campus. We actually didn't have an advocacy group on campus at all. They all focused on culture. And so, when I became president, a big focus for me was making sure that our students attended Emerge, which is the conference that happens every year in DC. We had immigration town halls. We attended marches and rallies together. We traveled across the country for conventions. We lobbied on the Hill and in Richmond, and we also held fundraisers. Like I mentioned earlier, a big thing for us was the 2016 presidential election. So in 2016, we registered 200 Latinos on and off campus to vote, and we assisted them with getting to the polls during the presidential election. And that very year, I was able to take 10 students from my council with me to emerge for the first time so that they could learn about immigration, healthcare, and education. And this was big. This was a big deal because this was the first time a group of Latino students from McDaniel attended a Latino conference, which is crazy because you would think that, they would have done that before, but that wasn't done before. So our comms team at McDaniel went crazy writing about us. But the thing about me is that, why weren't we given this opportunity before? Why was it until now that we had to fundraise, we had to put in so much work, be able to all attend, this very prestigious annual conference in DC, in the nation's capital. These are things that I've obviously brought up now, that I'm on the board for diversity for McDaniel. But the very important thing is, the students from my council, we also lobbied on Capitol Hill, attended these very big galas. We networked with student leaders from across the country, and we were empowered by amazing speakers at the conference. For me, all of this was just a life-changing experience. I was able to see the impact that attending a conference like Emerge had on the students from my council. This council specifically was focused on giving students the tools that they need to advocate for the Latino community. So founding it gave me the opportunity to continue to advocate for an issue that matters to me, but also encourage others to do the same. So for me, this LULAC council, it was more like my baby, it became my baby, and then I had to let my baby go because I had to, graduate. But, it was just one of the most transformative experiences of my life. I was able to really learn how to empower others and teach others how to be advocates in their communities, because that's how I see leadership. For me, I always tell people that, being a leader is more about empowering others and serving as a mentor to those who also wish to make an impact in their communities. We got to make space for everyone. It can't just be me. We need more people who look like me, at these tables. And so having this council, has not only, helped me grow as a leader, but as a person as well, taught me a lot more about leadership. And so after college, I was approached by the state director of Virginia LULAC. He asked me to join their council, and so I did it here in Arlington, Virginia. And 2 years later, he asked me to be his deputy, and I was like, yes, I would love to, because the work that we were doing in Arlington was just amazing. We were going to different high schools, presenting about scholarships, internships, and fellowship. We were every year sending a young student to the high school conference that LULAC has. We were mentoring Latino student group at an Arlington high school. We were doing a lot. After a couple of years, the state director told me that he wanted to retire. And when he stepped down, he asked me if I would like to be appointed state director. And I said, why not? At the time, I didn't think it would be a lot, but now that I'm in the role, it's a lot. It's definitely a lot, but it's work that fulfills me. So I love it. I started out as the state director of Virginia LULAC in December of 2020, actually December 2020. It was a big role, because, we had to figure out a lot of things, and we needed to establish councils. And so the biggest thing I think for Virginia LULAC was working on the infrastructure, because it didn't have one. It had no infrastructure. And I worked very closely with the past state director, but, in working with him, I realized that we needed to do a lot of work with the infrastructure, because, he was ready to retire. So he was, he was like, you know what, just go ahead. Let's just go ahead and run with it. And so I ran with it, and I made sure to focus on our infrastructure first, make sure we had a website up, make sure we were a 501c4, make sure, that a lot of boxes were checked in order for us to get started on fundraisers and different events. And so the biggest event we've had was last year in July. We partnered with the Kennedy Center to have this big Latino festival called Viva Cultura. It was a 3-day event where we brought artisans, dancers, we brought in different bands, a DJ, and we showcased a movie that, folks were able to watch on the lawn and then talk about after during one of the discussions that was led by the team at the Kennedy Center. So that was the the biggest event we've had, and that we were able to do something like that is just insane. Like thinking about it now, it's just like, wow, like I can't believe we did that. But, now, we continue to do the kind of work that I have always envisioned Virginia LULAC doing, we currently have a clothing and food drive. In December of last year, we gave out toys to the community I grew up in. So it meant a lot. And, I feel like I mentioned earlier, all of it is just full circle. Like I'm just continuing to do the work that, connects with my identity and that fulfills me. And so for folks who want to get involved specifically with a Virginia LULAC Council, go to www.valulac.org. You will find my information there. You will be able to find how to register for a council in Virginia, and that is how to get involved. But if you want to get involved and get on LULAC's mailing list, just go to www.lulac.org and you can register for their mailing list, or even sign up to be a member through LULAC National, and eventually they'll connect you, to the city and state that you identify with. So if you choose Virginia, if you're from Virginia, you'll be connected with me. So that's how to get involved, and I highly recommend getting involved.
What's next for you? Like, what's your future look like, and what's your aspirations? What would you, if you had your dream job, or even if you had to reach for the stars, like you've done a lot. So what's next for you?
So for me, what's next? I'll be starting my master's in public policy this fall at the University of Virginia. So I'm super excited. You said dream job, and I immediately thought of, this dream I've had for years to run for office someday. Ideally, I'd like to start off as delegate of the 8th Congressional District of Virginia. But if we're talking, like big dream over here, like I want to be a senator. That's always been my dream, to run for office. I want to be a senator. My boyfriend and I always joke that, I can't be president because I wasn't born in this country. But the other highest thing that I could be is Speaker of the House. So if we really want to aim high, Speaker of the House. But for me, after my master's program, I want to work at a nonprofit that focuses on immigration policy. I want to advocate for immigration policy at the federal level. I feel like, after getting my master's, after all this experience, I'm ready to continue advocating for the immigrant community. And then after that, like I mentioned, I want to run for office. And if I decide to aim high, we'll do senator. So that's what's in the future for me. I hope.
That seems like such a good plan. I think that's not just attainable, but it is going to be realized. I'm so excited to see you in that capacity. I really, truly believe, and I hope you are listening to other people who have your back. I think that you can make that happen. So Speaker of the House, let's do it. Let's make it happen. That's awesome. And remember Jasmin's name, Jasmin Chavez. Make sure that you vote for her if you can. And if you can't, because you don't reside in that state, make sure that you support her either way. There's other ways. And as we all have seen, crowdfunding and things like that. So when she's ready, she'll let us know. And I'll make sure to let you all know when she's ready to take office and move into that space. So not to kind of continue on in this trajectory, but I think we've touched upon immigration particularly, but what are some of the other important issues that are affecting not only locally the Latinx community, but also maybe even globally? What do you think are some of those things that are kind of propping themselves up and maybe we should pay more attention to?
That's a great question. I think, like I mentioned, immigration is a big one, but, the other one is healthcare. A lot of folks in Virginia, don't have access to healthcare. And I'm only speaking for Virginia right now, but, I'm sure in other states it might be a similar issue. But a lot of folks, just don't have access to resources about how to apply for, different, healthcares that are available in that state for free. And so making sure that folks have access to information is big. Making sure that, things are translated into Spanish is another big one, and so healthcare definitely. Education is another one. And I tie education into immigration a lot because as the state director and growing up, in an immigrant community, I've seen, the struggle with, having our immigrant community apply for college, because for DACA recipients specifically, they should be able to have in-state tuition, but that's not always the case. A lot of schools are still making it almost impossible in Virginia for DACA recipients to get in-state tuition. I actually just recently worked with a young student who wasn't able to qualify for in-state tuition even though she has DACA. And it's just crazy that this is something we're having to deal with, because back in the day, with, instituting in-state tuition, it was, the idea was that, everyone would get in-state tuition, but no, it's just, our immigrant community continues to be left behind. And I think that with education and, the growing cost of, schools and just the growing cost of education, like that something needs to be done about that specifically. But I also working for an organization that, assists the elderly community. And so another thing that I would highly, say that is an important issue is, finances, financial stuff for our community is another big one. I know a lot of people don't think about it because, it's just something that we don't really talk about. Now that I work for an organization, that targets the elderly community, I've been able to meet a lot of Latino elders. A lot of them, are struggling with their financials, and just seeing the way in which we tend to hide that topic and not talking about it, doesn't help us. And so I highly would say, being educated on financial stuff is important, because I'm over here helping folk apply for different programs through the Social Security Administration, and just this goes along with just having access to resources. If we don't have that, how are we able to learn about healthcare that's available to us for free? How are we able to figure out, I can apply for SSA at this age, or when I reach this much of working, like how we don't have that information if we don't have the access to the resources. So those are a few issues I definitely would say are very important in the Latinx community.
What materials should our listeners engage with in understanding the world of equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice?
A movie that I highly recommend everyone watch is called Voces Inocentes. I know a lot about the Salvadoran Civil War because, my family went through it. One of my uncles actually was a soldier in the Civil War, and he died. He was the firstborn in my mom's side of the family. But watching this movie, I think, has helped others really learn about what it is that the Salvadoran community went through. And so if you want to learn about Salvadoran history, if you want to learn about the Civil War, Voces Inocentes is one of my favorite movies, to watch, teach folks about, what the history looked like, what happened, because there is a lot of misinformation out there about it. So highly recommend Voces Inocentes. I also have this book called Latina, Women's Voices from the Borderlands. I really like this book. It talks a lot about, like I mentioned, coming from the border and that experience, but this is, specifically women's voices. So, it talks a lot. It's a very heavy book because it talks about, some of the violence that the women experience. And, if this is a good book, I highly recommend it as well. I also recommend, like I mentioned earlier, The Distance Between Us. I read it in Spanish because like I mentioned, I had a major, I majored in Spanish in college, and those were one of the books we had to read, so I read it in Spanish. Another book I highly recommend is, The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. And I also have this book that I've been meaning to get to because it was a gift from one of my favorite teachers in college. It's called Life on the Hyphen, The Cuban American Way, by Gustavo Perez Firmat. So these are a few of the many books I have on my bookshelf, but that I love so much. I love reading about our community faces and, just reading about the stories of, women who have crossed the border. It's something I have been reading a lot more since I got back from the border, because I actually met two women who were 6 months pregnant, who literally dug a hole from one side of the border to the other just to give their babies who are still in their stomach, a better life. And so for me, like crazy, the stuff that people have gone through, the difficult hardships that people have gone through, I've been reading more into that and trying to read and learn more about that, because it's just like, wow, like, just you want to know, like, what are they thinking when I'm going to literally like dig a hole from one side of the border to the other, It's stuff like that you're like, it continues to reaffirm why I do the work that I do. And so I guess that's why I read it. I highly recommend those books.
Oh, those are great books. I want to make sure that we tag them in our podcast notes. I always talk about that we are in the Limbo Latino podcast Sala, which is our living room. And I feel like you and I have talked about everything under the sun. I think there's actually more that we will hopefully highlight in the future. Love to have you come back So we're at the end of the show, and I would always give my guests the parting words of wisdom, or maybe just a saying that really leaves an imprint on the La Familia.
Yeah, I think for me, I've always, as a young Latina, I've always struggled to believe in myself. People are always saying, like, oh, you've done so much. But, sometimes, I don't feel like I have, a thing that goes with growth, right? But for all the Latinas, young Latinas out there listening, I just want to say, believe in yourself, know your worth, and, don't be afraid to talk about yourself, because you have done a lot, and, folks need to hear about it. They need to hear about your story and why you do what you do, and you are valuable. And that's what I want to leave this podcast with.
Jasmin, thank you so much. I think that is the exclamation point to our conversation today. And thank you so much for centering particularly women and Latinx women, and specifically the diaspora. I think that's such a poignant piece right there that we do not spend enough time on. So thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, my participants. Thank you, my listeners. Thank you for everything. Jasmin Chavez, remember, I don't know what year she's going to be running for office, but you better give her props. You better give her support. This is the Limbo Latino podcast with my guest, Jasmin Chavez. Thank you so much, Jasmin.
Thank you.
All right, my friends, that is the end of the episode. We hope you had a great time. Now, remember to subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode of what? The Limbo Latino podcast with your host, Joseph Colon, a.k.a. the Limbo Latino. Mi familia, te veo. Hasta luego.